Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special Photo Brigade panel on photographing the night sky. I'm really excited. I've got astronaut Donald Pettit. He's back here coming to us from NASA in Houston via Skype. And I've also got my friends Gary Hirschorn and Stan Honda over my shoulders who are going to be moderating this panel. They're both wonderful photographers that are in the news, were in the news industry, still are to an extent, and also are doing lots of astro-type photography. Gary shooting mostly the moonscape and the New York in the background. Stan is a member of the Amateur Astronomers Association, who's part of this special event as well. But before we get started, I just want to say thanks to Adorama for the use of their event space, as always. You can tune in to all of our events and podcasts, so please do follow them and Photo Brigade. Thanks to Canon Professional Services, Temba Bags, of course to NASA for hooking up this great live stream, and to the Amateurs Astronomers Association of New York. Check them out online. So I'm going to pass this over to my friend Stan to take it from here. Oh, also, let me show this. Check out Don's book, Spaceborne. It's wonderful photos from his, what is it, Don? About 370 days you spent on the International Space Station? Something like that. Anyways, check it out. The website is space-borne.com, and if you use promo code PhotoBrigade, you can get 20% off if you go ahead and pick that up. All right? Take it away, Stan.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks for joining us here at Adorama, and thank you, Donald and Gary, for joining us on the panel here. My name is Stan Honda. I'm a photographer based here in New York City. I've been here for about almost 30 years now. My background's in photojournalism. I worked for Agency France Presse, the French news agency based here in New York City, covering all sorts of things like news, business, sports, politics. For 5 years, I covered the space shuttle program. Would go down to Florida for all the launches and landings. So it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with astronaut Donald Pettit on the panel here. Currently, I'm doing a lot of a project on the night sky landscapes, which I've been doing for a few years now. And part of it is I've been able to do 5 artist in residence programs at national parks, mainly out west, photographing the night sky, just with the aim of trying to get people to help preserve our view of the night sky. And 2 of the photos that I shot, a couple of them I'll show you later today, of Chaco Culture and Wupaki National Parks were used in their reports to earn dark sky status for the national parks. So I also managed to photograph a few celestial events here in New York City. And Donald Pettit is an active NASA astronaut, a photographer, inventor, and a scientist who has had the extraordinary experience of spending 370 days aboard the International Space Station, including 13 hours of spacewalking, and was Mission Specialist 1 on STS-126, the Space Shuttle mission. Aside from creating some of the most unique and stunning photographs ever made in space during Expedition 6, Pettit used spare parts found throughout the space station to create a barn door tracker. This was a unique device that compensated for the movement of the International Space Station relative to the Earth's surface, allowing for sharper photographs of city lights at night while orbiting the space station. Pettit also invented a zero-gravity cup made from nothing more than clear plastic report cover and some fancy NASA tape. The cup and its explanation of the science behind it, internal cup angle to the contact wetting angle for the non-wetting plastic, was featured in National Geographic magazine. His book, Spaceborne, is a portfolio of images shot aboard the International Space Station and is published by PSG. Gary Hirschorn, on my left here, this is another picture by Donald, sorry. Gary Hirschorn is a photographer and photo editor based in New York City. He specializes in editorial and event coverage, having worked at Reuters for 29 years. News features and sporting events are his primary area of coverage. More recently, Gary has been focusing his lens on sunsets and moonrises over New York City, and has created an amazing body of work of the sun and moon against the skyline, You can follow Gary on Instagram and Facebook, as well as you can follow myself on Instagram and Facebook too. So Don, welcome to the panel here. I started out with a couple of photos of you at work. Here's you. I think this is yourself reflected in one of the windows in the cupola. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a reflection in the cupola windows, and reflections are the bane of nighttime photography in space, because you've got 4 panes of glass, 8 surfaces that you're taking pictures through. They all have anti-reflection coatings, but there's still enough surface reflection to give a whole bunch of little reflections if there's other light bouncing around in the cupola where you're taking pictures. And behind me now is an interior picture of the cupola where we keep a few of our cameras there ready to go.
Right. I have that picture next showing on our slideshow here, and there are a lot of photographers here in Adorama and viewing on the live view feed. I think people are interested in the equipment that you're using. I notice looks like 6 Nikon cameras here attached to various magic arms.
Yeah, actually, I think there's 7 there. There's a couple that are floating around. They're just free floating. One of the reasons we have so many cameras is the Earth goes by really fast. We orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. If you look at about 24,000 miles in circumference, you're going miles per second. And if you want that shot, that special shot where everything's lined up perfectly, you have maybe 5 seconds to get that picture for any one location. And so if you even have to stop and turn your camera on, you could miss the shot. So we keep all our cameras there with an ensemble of lenses set up with different shutter speeds and things like that. And we always keep them on. And all you need to do is reach over, grab your camera, and start taking a picture. And if somebody inadvertently turned that camera off and you were expecting it to be on, and you start taking pictures, it obviously doesn't work, and by the time you figure that out and turn it on, you have a good chance of missing the critical alignment for that shot.
Right. So then you could plan a shot with all of these different cameras using different lenses then, and get just different perspectives on the same subject.
You can, and we're 400 kilometers, about 240 nautical miles above Earth, and from that vantage, you have a viewpoint of about half a continent. Wow. And so you can see structure on the detail of a half a continent, yeah. and that is the real advantage of being in space. And behind me now is a picture of Spain at nighttime, and it's all of Spain, with Portugal, right, and North Africa and the Straits of Gibraltar. And so for my viewpoint, I like wide angle views. So I would set up a whole ensemble of cameras with as many different wide angle lenses as we had on station, some of them fast, some of them slow, because I specialized in the wide angle oblique views of Earth, because those are so unique. You can't get those by going into Google Earth.
Right. And it looks like you got some great foreground objects. I think, is this the Progress or a Soyuz craft with the Aurora in the background?
Oh yeah, that's actually a Soyuz that's docked to station. That's a Soyuz I flew up to station with, okay. and you. Like composition for any sort of photography, it's neat to have something in the foreground, and the picture over, so there's the Soyuz spacecraft in the foreground with a Progress spacecraft, and then you get the Aurora there as well, and you can just shoot a picture of nothing but Aurora and Earth, but it's neat to have some perspective in terms of the hardware around you, and it's all part of composition.
Yeah, this is great. For the people in the audience, the Soyuz spacecraft was the manned craft that takes astronauts and cosmonauts up to the space station now, and the Progress is the supply ship that the Russians send up to resupply the ISS. Right, and here's the picture you were just showing of the Soyuz and the progress. So yeah, pretty interesting foreground objects. When I was looking through your photos,
let me point out the aurora picture that's over my shoulder now. The red part of the aurora is 3 f-stops weaker intensity than the green.
Okay.
So if you expose for the red, the green is all overexposed and saturated and blown out. If you expose for the green, the red doesn't show up. And so what I would have to do to get a picture like behind me is to make a high dynamic range picture where you quickly take 3 to 5 pictures in rapid sequence, and then you assemble them as a high dynamic range picture afterwards. But normal software doesn't work for that because there's significant motion in between each picture. And the high dynamic range pictures, to really make them look good, you have to hand assemble them tediously with your favorite image processing routine.
Okay, well, okay, that's pretty interesting. When I'm looking through your photos, the picture of Comet Lovejoy here. I'm sorry, this is Comet Lovejoy?
That's Comet Lovejoy, and it became visible the day I launched.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable over the edge of the Earth there.
And Dan Burbank, one of my crewmates, was the one that actually took that picture of Comet Lovejoy, because I was still floating in the Soyuz spacecraft coming up the station, focused in on docking when Dan took that picture.
Right. And then this next picture, is this some sort of attitude adjustment burn?
Yeah, that's a reboost.
Okay.
And one of the costs, we've power stationed with solar power. And you think, wow, that's free. Once you've paid for the hardware, you get it up there, it's free energy.
Yeah.
Well, those solar panels have a lot of drag, a lot of cross-sectional area. There's still enough residual atmosphere at that altitude that we will lose 100 meters of altitude every day.
Wow.
Primarily due to the solar panels.
Yeah.
So about once every 3 weeks, we have to fire our rocket engine and reboost station to keep its altitude. So the cost of this free solar power really manifests itself in terms of rocket fuel. And when we do the burn, that's a neat, dynamic event, oftentimes at nighttime, to capture the actual burn during the reboost for space station. And the propellants glow because they're chemically reactive, and you see this neat glow well beyond the rocket nozzles.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Let's see. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing. I do a lot of night sky pictures, and this is next couple pictures are the International Space Station. I looked up the missions to see, Don, if you were on one of these missions, but it turns out that they were too recent for you to be up there. So this was in just this last July in Rocky Mountain National Park, about a 2.5-minute exposure of the space station, cutting straight through the Milky Way, starting around where Saturn and Mars were that evening, and going up through past the star Altair. And this is a 3-minute exposure of the space station as it's going from, I think, south to north over Chaco Canyon National Park in northwestern New Mexico. My foreground objects are nothing like Donald Pettit's foreground objects. I try to shoot a lot of the terrestrial landscape and against the night sky using wide-angle lenses and digital cameras, just to kind of show the relationship between the night sky and the Earth. Another one from Chaco Canyon, a star trail, equivalent of a 60-minute exposure of over Fajada Butte, one of the sacred sites there in Chaco Canyon. I've been to the Grand Canyon a couple times as an artist in residence, and the North Rim is an amazing place if you've never been to that part of the Grand Canyon. I plan a lot of the trips that I take around the moon phases so that I can get just before and after the new moon. There's usually a crescent phases that light up the landscape enough to get captured with a digital camera, but they don't wash out the stars in the sky. Unfortunately, Gary and I, as terrestrial photographers, we have to worry about light pollution and haze and things that cloud up our view of the stars, whereas Donald really doesn't really need to deal with too much in terms of haze or light pollution up there. I've been working on a series of images, close-up images of plants, but my wife calls them botanicals, where I try to get very close with a wide-angle lens to plants. This is a pinyon pine tree in the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And the stars and everything in the background become really out of focus. The great thing is it often will accentuate things like constellations. On the right side of this image, you can see the constellation Scorpius, and the very bright white dot is the planet Saturn. And then you can see the band of the Milky Way going diagonally up through the center of the picture. And at Rocky Mountain National Park, I was walking along the side of a lake and looked up through a grove of trees, and this is basically what I saw. This is pretty close to what I was seeing with my eyes. In the end of July and middle of the night, a summer night, the summer Milky Way stretching straight overhead. It made for an interesting pattern and an interesting photo. So we'll. This is another image from Wupaki National Park in Arizona, which has an incredible collection of Pueblo sites that really lend themselves to some interesting photos. So Gary does a lot of pretty much all your pictures that we're going to talk about today from here in New York City and New Jersey, right?
Yeah, I'm the guy that just stays at home. I don't go to any exotic places. I think New York is exotic in its own right, and it has without question, the best urban landscape out of any city anywhere in the world. So,
well, your landscape here really is the city, the buildings of the city and the skyscrapers.
Is the city. This is the picture that got me started on photographing the moon. This was a super moon in May of 2012, and it was actually it was a Saturday night that the actual super moon was rising, and it was like a rainstorm to end all rainstorms in New York. And I went out the next night. It was Sunday night, and this was about 10 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And it was, visually it was the same size as it came up on the horizon. And so everybody called this the supermoon when it was actually one day later.
Right. Okay. This looks like another skyline of Manhattan.
Yeah, this one's from Weehawken, and I use this to emphasize how bright the moon actually is. Yeah. When it rises in the sky, it casts a shadow of the buildings and kind of like a golden carpet there, similar to what the sun does.
All right.
When it rises. So the moon is an extraordinary bright object that sometimes people don't realize.
Well, if we didn't have a lot of this street lights around, we could actually see the shadows created by
Absolutely.
the moon.
Absolutely.
This I thought was a nice picture. You've included people in the picture. Really gives a nice perspective.
Yeah, I try. It's hard to do it with the moon every time, but I try to put people in every one of my pictures. I love an urban landscape with a silhouette of a human being for perspective in the foreground. And this is just shot from Hoboken on the waterfront, and you just stand back away from the river. And what amazes me is no matter where you go, no matter where you photograph the moon, there's always people staring up at it. It's a mesmerizing sight for almost everybody who goes out and sees it rise.
Right. I mean, people say you can't do urban astronomy. You can't see things in the sky, but we could see the moon. We could see the bright planets here in New York City.
I was going to ask Don what's like to watch a moonrise from space.
Yeah.
With the 16 sunsets you just told us about. What's it like to see the moon in that orbit?
The moonrise and moonsets and sunrises and sunsets from space are quite dramatic, and they are short. When you're in the cupola and the sun is rising or setting, it takes 7.5 seconds. And you will go from complete daylight to complete darkness, or from complete darkness to complete daylight in 7.5 seconds. And that's how long it takes for the half a degree disk of the sun or the moon to go below the horizon. And there's no atmosphere in terms of you are out of the atmosphere. So there's no prolonged twilight, there's no dawn, there's no dusk. And you either see the sun or you don't see the sun. And which means you have to be really quick if you want to catch that moment where the sun is just slipping below the horizon.
Right. So in the pictures that you're showing here, I'm trying to show off the diverse locations that exist on both sides of Manhattan. If you're shooting the Moonrise, you're going to be in Jersey. If you're going to shoot the moon setting, you're going to be in Brooklyn or Queens. And there are just countless countless places to capture the moon going up and down.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So this picture, that last picture, was taken in Jersey City. So we've had a picture taken from Eagle Rock Reservation out near Montclair, which is 13 miles. The first picture of the supermoon was 13 miles away from New York. We had a picture from Hoboken. We have had a picture from Weehawken. This one's from Jersey City.
Yeah, and we can even see a lunar eclipse from Manhattan, right?
Yeah, this was what, a year and a half ago. The blood red supermoon over Manhattan that night. This was the start of it. Again, trying to find people in the picture. I was down the stairs of a subway entrance, and people, were standing at the top of the stairs, and you could put it in with the moon and the Empire State Building. It's always important to put the moon. So many people, if you follow people on Instagram, so many people just point their camera at the moon and take a picture of it, which is absolutely gorgeous, on certain nights when it's rising and the color is red and orange. But I try to tell everybody you need a landmark. You need something in the foreground, whether it's a statue, a human, a building, something to identify the size, the perceived size of the moon as it's rising.
Right. It helps put it in perspective in terms of your location as well. That you can tell people you shot this moon from New York, but unless you have any kind of landscape, it's hard to put that.
Correct. And in New York, we're very lucky to have so many recognizable, iconic landmarks to use with it, and nothing at all beats the Statue of Liberty. If you're in a place to shoot the moon and the Statue of Liberty, just do it.
Yeah. And then here's another one of your eclipse photos that looks like the antenna on the top of the Empire State Building.
The Empire State Building, yes. That was shot straight down 34th Street.
So you can do, I've been doing a lot of shooting in the city with members of the Amateur Astronomers Association, and here Gary also shows that you could shoot some astro photos from New York City. I think a lot of people who are interested in equipment, Don, might be interested in this photo of you with this device. And can you explain a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, that is the amateur astronomy equivalent of a barn door tracker.
Okay.
And a barn door tracker is something that an amateur astronomer will put together, maybe two pieces of plywood with a piano hinge, and then a bolt that goes between them, and you'll put your camera on that and orient it correctly, and you'll turn the bolt maybe a quarter of a turn every 20 seconds, and you'll hinge the boards apart, and if everything's done right, you can track the planets or the stars and counteract the motion of Earth.
Right. So
and I basically did the same thing to counteract orbital motion from space. So barn door tracker counteracts Earth rotation to take pictures of space, and I made a barn door tracker to counteract orbital motion from space to take pictures of Earth.
So you're taking essentially you're focusing in on something on the Earth's surface while you're using your barn door tracker here.
Yeah, exactly. And what this allowed you to do was take longer exposures of dimly lit objects on Earth at nighttime. And things that would take maybe a half a second to 1 second exposure, if you handheld a shot like that, it would have a certain amount of fuzziness to it. It wouldn't be sharp. And with this barn door tracker, I would use the drill, driving a screw, to give 1 degree of gimbal very smoothly so you could tilt the platform. And then I looked through one camera with a telephoto lens, and in this case it happened to be a Hasselblad with a 350 millimeter telephoto lens. And I would squeeze the trigger on the drill driver until the image would be stationary on the reticle in that camera. And then I'd take a picture with a cable release with a separate camera mounted on the platform.
Okay, and then so how fast is your drill rotating though?
It's rotating maybe 10 to 12 revolutions a minute. It's rotating pretty slow in order to do the tracking.
Yeah.
And you could get maybe 3 or 4 pictures off before you run out of threaded bolt, and then you have to stop and back it up and do it all over again.
And so this was assembled with just parts that you found aboard the space station?
Yeah, I assembled it from just junk and leftover equipment on the space station, specifically so I could get pictures of cities at nighttime, which up until that point, all the focus was soft on the cities at night. And this allowed you to zoom in, track, and get a 1/2 to 1 second exposure and still preserve the sharpness of the photograph.
Okay, what is that? What city is that behind you?
Oh, that's Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And you can see kind of the diamond. It's kind of lopsided a little bit. North is actually pointing this direction, and you can see the Potomac River there, and you can see the Congressional Mall and where the White House is, and the Congress Building,
right,
and the Washington Monument. All of that's visible in that picture. And the picture behind you right now, I think that's Amsterdam.
Well, it's called Fishing Boat Nebula, and to me it looks like you're photographing something.
Nebula. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like you're photographing something out into space, a nebula. But explain what this is.
Okay, that's in the South China Sea, and these are fishing boats off in the ocean using really intense xenon lights to lure squid and other things. I like to say that they're getting the next day's sushi ready for you.
Right.
And then there's usually ocean fog. And so that was a photograph taken not of looking upwards at the stars, but looking down at Earth of all these fishing boats with the sea fog. And to first order, it kind of looks like something you'd see from a Hubble shot.
Right. I think this is New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Yeah, with the barn door tracker.
And you can see the French Quarter is very active. I think that one was taken around 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right, yeah. All the lights are on there, and you could see the river going through the city pretty clearly. And here you are, I think, with an infrared camera. Is that right?
Yeah, I was able to talk the NASA engineers into removing the infrared blocking filter on one of our Nikon cameras, and then I mounted it side by side, or in this case up and down, with a normal camera, and that way you could take simultaneous infrared, color infrared, and visible photography, and it was handheld astronaut photography as opposed to the satellite imagery, and so your compositions are going to be a little different. Your subjects of choice are going to be a little different. Right.
This next picture I really liked a lot. This is your fellow crew members, right?
Oh, that's a crew portrait, and this was taken with a thermal infrared camera, which is a longer wavelength range. That one centers around 8 to 10 microns, and that's the wavelength that we give off because of our body heat, and I had to get a crew portrait in infrared.
Right. This is a great portrait here, and here's one of your infrared shots of I think of Bermuda.
Yeah, that's in the Bahamas.
I'm sorry, Bahamas.
And the coral reefs and the coral sands show up as this outlandish green yellow. It almost looks like a Matisse painting of some kind. And that's just the way it looks when you do a near-infrared photography. And anything that has plant life shows up as that magenta pink color. So you can see the islands, which are covered with all sorts of tropical vegetation, show up pink and magenta. And then the normal ocean shows up as kind of dark, muddy brown, but where there's coral reefs or coral sands shows up as this kind of ghoulish, greenish, yellow green.
Right, right. Let's see. So Gary, people say, well, the moon is huge in these pictures that you're shooting. You must have a giant telephoto lens. What kind of equipment are you using when you're shooting the moon rising?
Well, you know, running around New York with professional gear like Canon 1DXs or 5Ds is not a lot of fun with a tripod and lenses and stuff like that. So, you know, over the last few years, I've tried to downsize all the gear that I use for the moons and the skylines to small form factor cameras.
All right.
You know, so if you see some stuff that is with a wide angle lens, I tend to use this Canon G7x. It's an awesome camera. It creates a great file. You know, it shoots like 28 millimeters at 1.7. And it zooms to 100, but I use it mostly for wide-angle stuff of the city. Sunsets, if I'm doing a wide-angle moonrise, I'll use that. But for the long stuff, this picture here was the moon setting one morning behind the Statue of Liberty. And, you know, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning or 5:30. And I use the Canon M5 before it was the M3 mirrorless camera. It's got a 1-inch sensor. And when you put a 300 or a 400 millimeter lens on it, it almost doubles it. So that picture was taken with, let's say, a 400 5.6, small little 400 millimeter lens on this camera with an adapter that puts the Canon EF lens on the mirrorless, and you end up with an 800 millimeter lens. So if you're shooting anywhere along the riverfront, the East River, or along the Upper Bay in Brooklyn, it's about an 800 millimeter lens to shoot. That's pretty much full frame.
Okay.
So you need an 800 millimeter lens. So it's really nice of the camera manufacturers, Canon, Sony, to come out with these little cameras that they fit into a fanny pack or a backpack, and you're not carrying a lot of stuff around. The other thing that I don't do when I cross the river is carry a tripod. I refuse to carry a tripod around town. So I tend to use, if I know I'm going to be down by a river, by the East River, there's always a railing to clamp to. So I use a super clamp and a ball head. I also have these metal plates made by a photographer out in San Francisco called Overexposed. And I use those plates to put them on the ground if I can't find a railing to clamp to. You know, if I'm out in a park and there's no real railing.
Okay, right, and then you can get some nice low-angle shots.
Yeah, yeah. But it's just you know, find something that allows you to work without a tripod. I hate tripods.
Right,
you know?
right.
Unless I'm in the car and I'm driving somewhere along the Jersey coast and I can park my car and pull out the tripod.
Right.
I
know you
like
have
to
a lot
say
of,
that in space we don't need a tripod.
You're lucky.
Right.
You're lucky.
Yeah, that's always good.
So this picture is a moonrise just before sunrise.
Okay.
So it's a crescent moon 2 days before a new moon. You know, it's always, it tends to be that the day before a new moon, the moon rises such a small crescent, and it rises so close to sunrise, you never see it.
Right.
So you got to go out at least 2 days. Like the last day you can photograph a crescent moonrise is 2 days before a new moon.
Right.
And that was 2 days before the new moon, and that was just down the canyon of 42nd Street from Weehawken.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because crescent moons to me are beautiful, and they make for really nice photographs.
They're my favorite.
Yeah.
I actually love that. So.
And then here we've got it looks like a whole stadium of people and the moon.
Yes. So one of the things that people think about is the moon is only viewable or photographable in the night sky. And it's not. It's very viewable in a late or early evening sky. You know, an hour, 2 hours before sunset, you get a beautiful colored moon, or a beautiful moon. This happened to be at a soccer game last summer at MetLife Stadium here in New York, and right when they were playing the national anthems and they did the team photos, all the photographers in the stadium went over, as they do, to the center of the field to photograph the teams. And I didn't have to do that, and I stayed where I was in the corner of the field, and I just happened to notice this almost full moon rising behind the sunlit, yellow-shirted Colombian soccer fans. And again, anytime you can put people and the moon in the same frame adds a really nice perspective to a moonrise.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so here's, I think, one of your favorite subjects.
The statue, yeah, she's you know, definitely one of my best friends.
Right.
You know, and in Jersey, we're lucky we go to Liberty State Park, and we have pretty close access to the back side of the statue from Liberty State Park. So again, this is like an 800mm lens of the moon going past the torch.
Right, right. That's very nice. And then a very, very thin crescent moon here.
Yeah, this is probably either the first day after a new moon.
Mm-hmm.
So the first night that we actually see a crescent moon setting,
Yeah.
which happened like 2 nights ago. We're on the cycle now. 2 or 3 nights ago, we had the, you know, this thin
Mm-hmm.
moon. But this was taken last year, shot from Battery Park,
Okay.
at the bottom of Manhattan.
Right, right. That's a familiar location. And when I saw this picture, I immediately put it into the slideshow because it just seems to be a compelling composition and just an interesting look at New York and also the moon.
Right. That's back in my staircase that I did the eclipse
right.
photo from. Over, it's like 8th and 33. It's by the Farley Post Office.
Okay.
It's all been closed up for a year because of the construction that's going on there, so I'm waiting for them to open it again.
Yeah.
But I love a moonrise. This is probably closer to the winter. I love a moonrise when the sun's setting, so that you get the color of the sun on the buildings,
Right.
and you get the moon coming up.
Yeah, that would be the perfect time to shoot a moonrise. And here is, again, the Statue of Liberty.
The Statue of Liberty, again, just a moonrise slightly before sunset,
Mm-hmm.
so that you still see the moon, but you don't have a black sky. You know, any kind of moonrise without a black sky, I think, is the best. And you only get, like, you know, the full moon rises only once right before sunset,
Right.
or right around sunset, and that's the day to be out to get it. Now, out of 12 potential moonrises in the course of a year, you know, half of them are clouded out.
Right.
So, you know, people think that, you know, you get to photograph the moon many, many times. You know, they always see the moon in the sky, think, oh, it's easy to do. There's only one day where the moon rise happens when the ambient light matches the light of the moon.
And the key is really the ambient light on the landscape,
Correct.
too, so you can see see and photograph the landscape.
So you've got one shot at it each month, and if it's cloudy, you know, yeah, the next night the moon will do pretty much the same thing, but it'll be a black sky.
Right, right. And then the area around the statue will be very dark.
Exactly.
This is a familiar angle here.
Again, Jersey City, the south end of Jersey City, and I always like the moon peeking out through buildings. You know, it's total luck, right? You know, if you're standing, you know, 10 feet to the right, you know, the moon will be behind
Yeah.
a building, you won't see something like that. So.
Or even a foot to the left or right.
yeah,
would
when
make a
you're-
big difference in this photo.
Right, when you're talking about a large distance between you and the subject.
Okay. Yeah. So I think both Gary and Don, how do you plan the pictures? For Gary, I know people say, well, where's how do you know the moon's going to be there, rising up over the Statue of Liberty or Lower Manhattan?
Yeah, it's easy. You know, it used to be fun to say, well, you know, I'm a scientist and I can figure out with my slide rules and all my calculations as to where the moon was going to be and what the altitude or you know, it was going to come in at. And now, you know what? There's no guesswork anymore. There's just a whole slew of apps out there. I think most of us are using TPE, the Photographer's Ephemeris.
Mm-hmm.
I use that on a desktop. I use an app called Light Track on my phone. It tells you what time to be where, and now TPE actually has a new version with 3D topography, you know, built into the program. So there's not a lot of guesswork anymore, and it's nothing that we photograph when it comes to the moon is done by chance, where it used to be. People still say, you know, wow, how are you so lucky to be there when it happened and have your cameras ready to shoot it?
Well, good photos are not no accidents. So Don, you're up in the space station. What kind of planning do you do to get the photographs that you're getting?
Like folks on the ground with their apps, we have some NASA-written software, and it's called World Map. And this software keeps track of your position over Earth, and then you can track things like the sun, and you can track the planets and the moon, and you can predict forward in terms of where things are going to be. And so you can use this so that you are prepared. And since you have an idea what you want to photograph, you set up your cameras appropriately, just like any photographer on Earth. Is it a telephoto subject? Is it a wide angle subject? Is it going to be a long time exposure? You plan all of this out ahead of time, and you plan and you scheme, and then you set things up. Sometimes I will do it in conjunction with people on the ground. For example, the Lyrid meteor shower, which occurred during my last flight, I was working with a number of NASA scientists scattered over the United States. So as we orbited over the United States, I had 5 cameras simultaneously going, shooting in all the directions I could arrange at the time to try to capture meteorites burning up in the atmosphere. And the scientists at NASA likewise had cameras pointing up, looking for the same meteorites. So that way, when we happened to catch a meteorite from both observation viewpoints, then you could try to determine more about the trajectory of what was going on with the meteorite.
Wow, that's great. Were you ever in the space station and you happened to see something go by you on the Earth? And did you ever think, well, maybe next orbit I'll try to photograph that, or some future orbit?
That happens all the time, where there's a particular subject you want to get, and say, for example, you want to go over New York City and take a picture of the World Trade Center, and this would be a telephoto shot, and you could do that, and it might be cloudy, or maybe it was either too dark or too light in terms of getting the exposure you wanted. And so then you say, well, let me do it next time. Well, your orbital track won't repeat for about 11 days. And so you literally get one shot of a particular place over the ground, and then you have to go back and wait till your orbital track goes over that spot again.
Right.
And then it might be in the middle of the night, or it might be cloudy, and so you oftentimes you might only get one chance at a particular subject,
right,
during your whole mission.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. In my vain attempt to try to keep with Gary and his moon pictures, I went over with some friends to Eagle Rock Reservation in New Jersey, and we photographed the moon just in early June, coming up with the One World Trade Center reflecting the setting sun coming up.
And I went out the next day.
Yeah, and to also photograph it. This one was the NASA picked this as the astronomy picture of the day on the website that they run, and so I was happy at that. Another setting to shoot a moonrise in New York City is just the running track around Central Park, around the reservoir, because the horizon of the skyline from either side of the track is usually about maybe 5 or 6 degrees, usually about 5 degrees, which is sort of astonishing when you think about New York City being a whole city of skyscrapers. So I was out there last December with a group from the AAA. Robert Kaplan joined us there. And as we're shooting the moon just coming up, just clearing the rooftops of some of the apartment buildings across the way, we see this jet from LaGuardia taking off, passing right in front of the moon. So I managed to time it pretty well and get it as it passed right in front of the moon. So I think I go to the similar spots that Gary does. This is also from Battery Park, the lower end of Manhattan. On New Year's Day, the first night of New Year's Day, the first moon set, it was a crescent moon, and it's set with the planet Venus, which is the bright object in the middle of the frame. And it was a wide shot, but I think it turned out to be an interesting shot with the statue and the 2 other objects. This also was picked by Astronomy Picture of the Day for their website. And part of the series that I've been doing on just sort of close-ups of plants and the background sky. This is from Carl Schurz Park on the east side of Manhattan, of one of the trees in winter. As the moon was rising, it was a little bit too bright just to shoot against the skyline, so I backed off with a telephoto lens and focused on the leaf of this tree and managed to get a nice out of focus moon in the background, but a nice image. And on a really clear night on a crescent moon, you can also photograph something called Earthshine on the moon, which is the Earth illuminating the dark portion, the side of the part of the moon that's not lit directly by the sun, gets lit up by reflection off of the Earth, and so you see the large seas and craters very faintly on the lit by the Earthshine, and it often shows up pretty well in photographs.
But not always.
Not always. No. This was kind of rare because the New York's atmosphere just has lots of haze, pollution, all sorts of stuff that you're shooting through. So it often doesn't work. If it's a very clear, if the air is very clear, which often happens after a storm or often during the winter, you can get the Earthshine. I
also find that it tends to show up more on a morning. Mm-hmm. Just before sunrise,
right.
Moonrise.
Yeah, this is a moonrise about 5 a.m. in the morning, so it definitely worked here. Don, I'm showing one of the black and white terrestrial pictures that you have. I couldn't remember where this picture was taken.
That's in the Betsu Boca River Delta area of Madagascar, and most of the pictures you see from space are these intense saturated images, simply because Earth is such an intensely saturated color object to take pictures of. And I've been warping some of my pictures by making them into black and whites. And I find that your eyes focus on different details when you strip the color away. And some of my colleagues think that I'm butchering my pictures by removing the color. But I think it's kind of neat to be able to have this ensemble of black and white imagery taken from space, because it's typically something that you don't see when you have photography taken by astronauts.
Right. Just the composition and the detail that you could see in here is amazing. And obviously the patterns here show up really well. This is a real subtle picture, and I think thinking about the August 21st total eclipse that's coming up, I wanted to show this. This is, do you remember which eclipse this was?
Yes, that was the Annular Eclipse.
Okay.
In May of 2012.
Okay, yeah, I was in Chaco Canyon for that.
And this particular picture was taken, that's the shadow projected. That's the shadow projected in the clouds off the eastern coast of Kamchatka Peninsula. And talking about calculating things, I had to use this world map program that we have on station to try to figure out, would station even be on the same side of the planet when the shadow was going to be visible? And were we going to be close enough to see it? And then from that, you need to figure out what's its field of view going to be and which lens is going to be the best to capture it. And it turned out we were close enough to that eclipse shadow, and so that we could get the picture. And the thing I like about this picture is that you can see the umbra and the penumbra regions of the shadow, and it looks just like what these astronomers from 200 to 300 years ago would predict, yet they never had a chance to see it from an orbital perspective. So I thought it was a real neat existence proof that indeed the Earth is not flat, it is round, and you could see these astronomy events from a perspective that human beings have rarely had a chance to see except in the last 10 to 20 years.
Right. And we'll show a few of the star trail pictures that you have. I was talking to you earlier about the orbit. So the orbit of the space station is about 90 minutes, but then how much darkness do you actually have during each orbit?
You get about 30 minutes of really dark, and maybe 40 minutes of what you would call darkness, because there is some reflection from the sun off of the panels and the structure on station, and it isn't until the disk of the sun slides below the horizon, and that process takes 7.5 seconds, and then it's like the lights were switched out and it gets really dark. And let me comment one other thing about the picture that you're currently showing.
Sure.
On your link. That flash in the middle of the picture,
right,
that is an Iridium satellite flash. And those things last about 1 second. And there's a fellow by the name of Rob Matson that lives in the Los Angeles area, an amateur astronomer, and he has calculated the engine that allows you to figure out when you can see one of these flashes from anywhere on Earth. And he contacted me while I was on station and said, let me modify my code, and if you're willing to set up, I'll send you predictions for when you can capture an Iridium satellite flash from orbit. So that particular flash, that just wasn't happenstance. That was the result of a lot of code crunching, a lot of computer processing, and then setting up everything just right and having the shutter open so that when the flash occurred, you could capture it.
That's great, because I get a lot of Iridium flares through the long exposures from Earth, but I think I've seen the prediction apps that talk about when they'll happen. The other things that are in this picture, I think that you might have mentioned that the Zodiacal Light is in this photo as well.
Yeah, that is viewed just sort of on the right-hand side of the picture, the kind of the purplish glow coming up from the sunrise.
Okay.
And Zodiacal Light, it's almost this will-o'-the-wisp thing from here on Earth if you try to see it, because it's very faint. Yeah. And if you have any kind of light pollution or scattering, it makes it very difficult to see. But when you're in orbit, you can see the Zodiacal Light. And the Zodiacal Light is light scattering from cosmic dust and grains and other things that are in the plane of the ecliptic in our solar system. So it has nothing to do with Earth's atmosphere. It's genuinely a phenomenon that's built into our solar system.
Right, along the plane of where all the planets are. You could see it from a very dark sky location here on Earth, but it has to be pretty dark. I was thinking of toward the end of the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, there's lots of kind of psychedelic scenes that Stanley Kubrick had done in the film, and it reminded me of this picture. Reminded me of that.
Oh, yeah. These are time exposures. Okay. Not unlike what an amateur astronomer would do by putting a camera on a tripod. And you're going to have to do your tripod for this, and you maybe have the North Star somewhere in the picture. And you leave the shutter open for a number of hours, and you'll see these star trails. And I did the same thing from orbit and captured a whole host of optical phenomenon that occurs in the nighttime from an orbital perspective.
How long is this exposure for this particular photo?
That's about a 30-minute exposure, maybe a little less.
Okay.
And all those flashes that you see, you can see the Earth in about 2/3 of the picture is the Earth. That thing that looks like a slice of key lime pie laying on top of Earth, that's our atmosphere. Okay. And that's all the thickness of the atmosphere we have. And it's glowing green because of the atomic oxygen in our atmosphere glows green from solar particles coming out. And all those white flashes, those are single thunderstorms as a function of time, where it'll go flash, and then Earth will move, and you will move, and then it goes flash again, and then again. And so that's a time history of a single thunderstorm.
Wow, that's great. And then this is amazing because it almost seems like they're random lines going through your photo here?
Oh, well, those are cities. On the Earth part, those are cities at night, and they make the exposure, and oh, that's another one. The space station was actually doing a yaw maneuver during the exposure. So not only do the cities on the surface of Earth kind of move in these wacko directions,
right.
The star trails that are in the sky, they are also moving in kind of wacko directions, simply because station is doing this rotation during the course of this 30-minute exposure.
Right, right. It's nice how you framed it also with with part of the station on the right side and one of the arms on the left side.
Well, one thing you have to remember on station, windows are where they are.
Right.
And if you want a better composition by moving over 4 or 5 feet to your left or right, you can't do that. So you're pretty much stuck with with what you happen to be viewing, and you make the best with the compositions that you can do.
Well, you're doing pretty good, I think, especially with this photo. This is a pretty wild image here.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite, and I call it the ghost panel, because during the course of this exposure, the solar panel was moving in this picture, and it made it kind of blurry, and it kind of gives you this ghost effect. You can also see a little bit of the zodiacal light coming out from it, just the direction of all the cities moving on Earth and the motion of the stars. This is one of my all-time favorite star trail pictures.
Yeah, this is a good one. We're back to Earth now, and we're back to the Statue of Liberty and an incredibly thin crescent moon. This must have been maybe
that was the first day of the crescent, the first day after the new moon. That was just a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And it just went through this narrow band of sky that had no cloud in it.
Yeah. So this is you were in the right place at the right time when the clouds parted.
Yeah. That was out in Red Hook in Brooklyn.
Yeah. And, well, if it was a couple weeks ago too, would have been the first day of Ramadan.
Yes.
You have to visually see the crescent moon.
So this is just 4 pictures the day after you were at Eagle Rock.
Okay.
Simply to show the actual trajectory of a moonrise.
Yes.
A lot of people think it goes straight up in the air.
Right. So this is proof that it doesn't go straight up in the air. The landscape is more or less stationary here, and there goes the moon up in a diagonal direction. And of course, in the northern hemisphere, it goes from north to south. So it's heading toward the southern part of the sky.
It was, when I look at these pictures, if you go back, you can see right up to the very top of the Trade Center, the moon held its color, the red.
Yeah.
And when I put these pictures out on Twitter, I was hit by a barrage of people going, fake, fake, fake. The moon is never that color. It's never that color that high in the sky, and it's all fake. And I think one of the things that a lot of us who photograph a lot of this night sky stuff is the accusations that the pictures aren't real. That you did something in Photoshop to put the moon there. You colored it a certain way, and yes, there are people out there, especially in the Instagram world, who add a little help to their images to make the moon look a certain way, a certain size. But it's also the color is not. It's dictated by Mother Nature. This night we didn't think we were going to see the moon. It was so hazy out, and there was so much, I don't know whether it was moisture, haze, pollution in the sky, but it's what colored the moon and kept the moon that color that high up in the sky.
Yeah, every night is different, and the atmosphere changes quite a bit, especially in a place like New York City. So if there's a lot of haze, well, probably a lot of pollution, stuff that you and I are breathing in while we're shooting the pictures, along with everybody else, and that makes for a nice, pretty moon. But it also it is different every night.
Right, it definitely is.
Let's see, and this one I like a lot. It's a crescent moon, and
that's a crescent moon. Pardon?
What planet is that?
I forget.
Oh, okay.
That was shot from about the 56th floor of a building by Madison Square Park.
Okay, that's
23rd Street.
Yeah, very nice color of the sky there, and another very nice crescent moon with a little bit of earthshine showing through.
A little bit, yeah. Setting again. That's from Williamsburg. in Brooklyn.
Okay. So you're on the other side of...
On the other side for a moon set.
Manhattan.
And, you know, I've been trying to get this picture for quite a while. And, you know, you set up and the apps help you be where you need to be, but you can't always move left or right in every place that you go. It's kind of like the window that Don has to work with. You can't, sometimes you're up against a wall and you can't move.
Yeah.
This night I had a little bit to the left were trees. And I just got lucky, you know, it came up in the right spot.
Yeah, that's great. I've been experimenting a little bit with an infrared converted camera, a Sony A7S with an infrared filter over the sensor, and taking a few pictures up at North-South Lake up in the Catskills of the amateur astronomy group on one of our visits there. And this was just last Saturday, as the sky had cleared after a huge thunderstorm, and then by after midnight the sky actually cleared, so I was able to get some decent photos. And the infrared cuts through a lot of the haze, and you actually pick up a lot more stars, and you see a much more defined Milky Way in places where you might not see it. Thinking of this is a total solar eclipse in 2015 from Svalbard, which is an area far north of Norway. And I we just completed a solar photography class with the AAA in advance of the August 21st eclipse that'll happen across the continental U.S. And this picture I like. The last couple pictures I like a lot because it has people in it. It kind of shows you the relation of the sun. We were pretty fortunate. The sun wasn't very high in the sky, just about 10 or 11 degrees above the horizon. So this was another astronomy picture of the day of the eclipse, and it's nice because it shows the sun in relation to a landscape populated with people, and from this area. This is the first aurora I saw. I'm not as lucky as Don, where you could see it probably every few orbits, but the aurora that was happening the night following the eclipse was pretty spectacular. I do a little bit of these next couple shots are just through a telephoto lens, 200 millimeter lens, and it's a cropped image of the Andromeda Galaxy and the Orion Nebula on I have a mount that tracks the stars, a store-bought, not unlike Don built his, but I bought one and used the camera with a telephoto lens to do a little bit of deep space photography. And so here's a picture that someone must have taken of you, Don, right, in the cupola, looking up with the Earth well, above or below you. And then the final shot in our slideshow I thought was a very pretty shot of our Earth, looking down through the cupola. I guess you could say a spectacular day in space, very clear out. You could see the blue of the Earth. And I think we might, are we going to take any questions?
That cupola shot was actually a self-portrait. There's a window in the Russian segment that looks at the US segment. And so I set a camera up on intervalometer, and then I quickly flew through space station. It's probably 50 meters of passageways, and popped my head up inside of the cupola just in time to get a photograph.
Does Don have a few minutes for a couple questions?
Do you have a few minutes for some questions, Don?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I actually have a question for you, Don. I'm a little bit, and I'm over here. I don't know if, well, you can't really see me because of the way we're set up. But what is your background in photography exactly? I mean, obviously, you do a lot of other things when you're up there in space, and photography is probably low on that totem pole, but you're amazing at it. So what's your background?
Okay, I started taking pictures when I was in the 6th grade. And I had a hand-me-down Kodak Brownie camera, and that's the little brown plastic cube. And I think it took 127 film, I'm not sure. And I could afford to do black and white, and I learned how to develop and print. And it's all been downhill ever since. I would take all my summer money, and I finally was able to buy a Nikon F camera. And then I just kept going and going, and it was mostly self-taught photography. And then I would illustrate any kind of scientific project I would do, either in graduate school, undergraduate, or when I was working at Los Alamos. I would illustrate it with photography. And then I just kept doing that at NASA. And then NASA has a whole department of photo trainers that specifically teach us about the camera equipment we have on orbit and some of the unique aspects of photography on orbit. So in the course of just a lifetime of photography and some really good folks here at NASA that can warp your brain into how to use a camera correctly, that's how I got to where I am.
Okay. Awesome. I'm just going to relay a few more questions, actually. I heard a rumor that the cost of getting personal items and or cameras up into space is, no pun intended, astronomical. Just to get the weight of something up to space, can you give us a little bit of idea of what that would be in terms of fuel cost alone?
Are you talking about the commercial rocket program? It was the question was a little bit murky on my end of the internet, and if you could quickly paraphrase that, that would help.
Sorry, heard that it costs a lot of money to get anything up in space because of the cost of fuel, right? So do you get to bring any personal items up yourself? And like, for instance, if you want to bring another lens up, is that kind of a no-go?
Okay, first off, the fuel cost for space is cheap. The cost of the rocket fuel, the hydrogen and the oxygen, that's cheap compared to the rocket hardware that has to be built to really tight tolerances so it doesn't blow up off the launch pad. So the cost of space is really the rocket hardware, not so much the propellant. We do get to bring a small bag of personal effects on our space missions. And we can put, so long as it passes through NASA's safety review, we can put pretty much anything on it we want. And I would bring a few favorite things, like I brought a full aperture solar filter to fit on the telephoto lenses we had on Space Station. I brought some infrared blocking filters. I'd bring a few things like that to augment the photo equipment that we already had on Space Station.
I have a question from the internet from Joseph Martinez. Wondering, given the other astronauts may not be as versed in photography as you, do you advise other astronauts on the ISS in photography? I don't formally teach any classes, but we do a lot of talking in the hallway and after work. And I wrote an informal document. I call it Astronaut's Guide to Photography in Space. And I actually started writing this on my last space mission, and I posted a few blog chapters on this on the internet. And it goes into the details of taking pictures from space, and it's really warped towards a perspective of an astronaut, and it's kind of boring reading. You almost have to be part of the astronaut culture in order to get the idea of what's going on. Maybe one of these years I'll warp it into something that might be of interest for the general public. Wonderful. Brian is wondering, is there a place that they can get a part list for the barn door you created, the barn door tracker? No, the barn door tracker was made just from stuff I found on station, and unfortunately it's been torched by now. Those parts were considered not needed anymore, and the down mass is of such a high value. We'll bring either things that can be repaired and reused and flown again, or we bring the results of our scientific experiments that we're doing, the physical samples home. And so something like that just gets loaded on a cargo vehicle that burns up in the atmosphere.
Oh, no.
Okay, well, last question for you before we end this. I know you got I heard a rumor that you grew some vegetables on the station, and you have a nice garden now because of it.
I did. And I wanted the orbital equivalent of a potted plant in the corner, not something that was grown in a multi-million-dollar laboratory experiment. I just wanted some green in my part of the space capsule, in my little sleep station. And so I brought a few seeds, and I worked out a way to passively grow these plants using aeroponics. So it's a passive aeroponic growth chamber. And I was able to grow like a sunflower over 1.5 meters long, and it bloomed. And that's probably the largest plant that's ever been raised in the space environment so far. And I wanted to share the idea of how you grow plants in space in this informal manner. And I thought I could write a blog that would talk about the technology behind that. And maybe me and 5 other people would find that interesting. So I decided to tell this story by personifying one of my plants, a zucchini. And I had a blog that I called Diary of a Space Zucchini. And it's somewhere out there in the internet land. And this space zucchini became a 7th crew member and would go through all kinds of trials of being root bound and not having enough of the right kind of nutrients, and getting a brown patch on the leaves, and how can we take care of this plant in an environment where you didn't really have the right resources to take care of it. So anyway, that was a fun little project, a diary of a space zucchini.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Well, that's great. And I think that's it for us. I know that we got to get going. So I want to say thank you to Stan. I want to say thank you to Gary, and of course to you, Don. Hello, Don. I'm sticking my head in here. Hopefully you can see me. And thanks to those of you that showed up. Also, thank you to Adorama, again, Canon Professional Services, Tenba, to NASA. And Stan's got a couple of courses that you might want to shout out real quick.
Yeah, I'll be doing some one-day workshops here at Adorama on July 16th. I'll be doing a night sky photography workshop, which will last a few hours. And on August 6th, I'll do a solar photography class for those of you who might be interested in photographing the upcoming total eclipse. Those will be right here in the store, I think in this corner of the store here. And the Adorama on their website, they already have the listing up, and so you could register. It's a free. The workshops are all free. I think they ask you to register if they can get a count of the people coming, but that's all on the Adorama website right now.
Well, awesome. Don, thank you again for coming in from Houston. And everybody, make sure to follow us on photobrigade.com, on all of our social media at PhotoBrigade, and of course the panelists as well. We'll see you again next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks,
Thank
Don.
you.
Bye now.